Modern physics builds its entire mathematical foundation on a single premise, that the universe operates within a background of empty spacetime kinematics. But this framework immediately hits a wall. The gravitational constant, or big G, has no first principles derivation. It is an arbitrary parameter plugged into the standard equations to make the math balance. Move to the macro scale, and the calculations fail again. According to standard Newtonian gravity, stars at the outer edges of spiral galaxies should slow down as they orbit further from the center. Instead, observation shows their velocities remain completely flat. To fix this discrepancy, standard cosmology patched the math by inventing the dark matter halo, an undetectable mass supposedly accounting for 85% of the universe. Zoom back into our own orbit, and we find another unexplained gap. When probes like Galileo perform gravity assist flybys of Earth, they experience a residual, unaccounted-for velocity shift of 1 to 13 millimeters per second at perigee. This is known as the Flyby anomaly. General relativity offers no unified mechanism to explain these varied phenomena across such wildly different scales. Consequently, modern cosmology is not guided by a single underlying kinematic law. It relies on a patchwork of isolated mathematical fixes. The topological Geon framework offers a different approach. It discards the concept of empty space. Instead, the vacuum is modeled as a hyper-elastic Casimir light field, a dense, fluid-like medium known as the zero-point field, which exerts a continuous, omnidirectional pressure. In this medium, matter is not a fundamental point mass. It is topologically trapped light, structured as closed geometric loops called geons. Because matter is composed entirely of confined light interacting with a pressurized medium, gravity cannot be an inherent, fundamental pulling force. Instead, gravity and inertia operate as macroscopic pressure gradients, emerging naturally from the fluid dynamics of the zero-point field. By treating the vacuum strictly as a fluid, we can derive the gravitational constant, eliminate the dark matter hypothesis, and exactly predict these orbital anomalies. We start by defining mass not as an inherent property, but strictly by its geometric topology. Mass is the physical cross-section of trapped light displacing the background vacuum. This background vacuum has a specific baseline pressure, defined strictly by the electromagnetic Schwinger limit, the maximum electric field the vacuum can sustain before tearing. When two masses are placed in this pressurized field, they shadow each other. This is the Fatio-Casimir shielding effect. Each mass casts a physical pressure shadow onto the other. Blocking this background pressure creates a net inward push between structures. Mathematically, this shielding force equals the combined cross-sections multiplied by vacuum pressure, divided by pi times radius squared. To remain stable, the circulating wave must satisfy exactly 11 distinct spatial, rotational, and electromagnetic boundary constraints. These 11 degrees of freedom impose a strict electromagnetic coupling resistance on the structure. This mathematically locks the universal ratio of a geon's cross-section to its mass. By substituting this cross-section ratio into the shielding equation, the gravitational constant resolves precisely. G is derived exactly from the speed of light, Planck's reduced constant, the electron mass, and the fine structure constant. We can apply these exact same fluid dynamics to the macrostructure of spiral galaxies. Newtonian physics predicts that the orbital velocity of a galaxy's stars should drop off inversely with the square root of the radius once you move beyond the dense visible matter of the core. This chart compares that expectation against reality. The dashed blue curve shows the Newtonian prediction plummeting, while the solid white line displays the actual observed velocities of the stars, which remain stubbornly flat at the outer edges. The all-light framework explains this without inventing new particles. A massive galaxy is billions of trapped light geons rotating through the zero-point field. Classical fluid dynamics dictates that this continuous churning creates a macroscopic Casimir vacuum vortex. This 2D heat map displays that vortex. The circulating matter generates a distributed drop in the internal Casimir pressure, which acts as a vast artificial gravity well. To maintain structural integrity, the vortex requires strict equilibrium. The inward radial pressure of the ambient vacuum must perfectly balance the outward centrifugal force of the circulating light field. This graph illustrates the universal Pythagorean kinematics equation. Because Newtonian radial fall and the transverse rotation of the vacuum vortex operate orthogonally, we take their Pythagorean union. The declining blue Newtonian velocity and rising magenta vortex velocity combine perfectly to match the empirical data points. The flat velocity plateau is not a dark matter halo. It is the literal fluid dynamic wake of a rotating galaxy interacting with ambient background light. If this theory is mathematically sound, it must demonstrate scale invariance. The dynamics that govern galactic superstructures must also function in local Earth orbit. Over 3 decades, NASA radiometric tracking data has recorded spacecraft performing gravity assist maneuvers around Earth, experiencing residual velocity shifts of 1 to 13 millimeters per second. Applying the zero-point field framework, the physical rotation of the Earth's mass drags against the background light field, inducing a localized co-rotating vacuum vortex. Any spacecraft moving through this local field is subjected to the exact same universal Pythagorean kinematics as a star orbiting the outer edge of a galaxy. We calculate the flyby anomaly by finding the difference between the Pythagorean union and standard Newtonian velocity via binomial expansion. At perigee, the Newtonian velocity vastly exceeds the local vortex velocity, forcing higher-order terms below detection thresholds. The equation reduces exactly to vortex velocity squared divided by twice the Newtonian velocity. When we plug the historical tracking data from the Galileo and NEAR missions into this inverted formula, it yields an Earth vortex velocity of 6 to 14 meters per second. This perfectly aligns with the physical atmospheric rotation and light field drag expected at perigee altitudes. The flyby anomaly is not a failure of classical physics. It is the exact same light field kinematics resolving galaxy rotation, operating identically at the planetary scale. We can ground this theory in direct terrestrial proof. If the Earth creates a local zero-point field vortex, it must exert a continuous, measurable physical drag on our ground-level rotational frame. Mainstream geodesy asserts that the SAGNAT correction used in GPS networks is simply a kinematic illusion, a mathematical byproduct of the receiver rotating while the signal is in flight. These side-by-side diagrams compare that mainstream expectation on the left with the all-light framework on the right, which treats the offset as a physical, structural drag against the rotating baseline. To test this, an experimental analysis extracted bulk historical observation epochs directly from the NOAA Continuously Operating Reference Stations network. The methodology required rejecting standard 24-hour mean centering calibration algorithms. Those mean-stream formulas operate on circular logic, forcefully zeroing out the daily average and artificially erasing any permanent structural shift. Instead, the data window was restricted entirely to true local night hours to naturally neutralize the chaotic solar radiation and ionospheric noise of the daytime sky. The scatter plot demonstrates the next step. By utilizing differential GPS baseline subtraction across dual stations, the solver completely strips away the shared tropospheric weather delays, pulling the chaotic data firmly back to true zero and isolating the true structural anomaly. This technique was then scaled up to a massive 30-day batch run spanning 26 different mid-latitude receiving stations. This final plot maps the results. The empirically isolated data strictly decays geographically, tracing the Earth's rotational circumference toward the poles and locking tightly onto the theoretical cosine curve. This rigorous data explicitly validates the predicted 60-centimeter equatorial drift. The GPS network structurally proves that the zero-point field is a permanent physical medium. Cosmology must replace the assumption of empty space-time kinematics with absolute fluid dynamic light field mechanics. A single axiom, trading the ambient zero-point field as a physical pressure gradient, resolves the 3 greatest outstanding crises in astrophysics. The Fatio-Casimir shielding effect mathematically derives the gravitational constant directly from baseline vacuum pressure and geone topology, without relying on arbitrary parameters. The Pythagorean kinematic union perfectly predicts orbital anomalies on the planetary scale, and scales up seamlessly to eliminate the dark matter hallucination entirely. And the raw terrestrial data from our own navigation satellites provides irrefutable structural proof of this ambient background drag. True unification in physics requires discarding the void entirely and recognizing the cosmos as an all-encompassing, hyper-elastic geometry of light.